April 8th, 1944, 1742 hours. Somewhere over the frozen marshlands of the Eastern Front, dusk bleeding into dark. Lieutenant Alexei V. Kravchenko's breath fogged the canopy of his Yak-9 fighter. His eyes, raw from scanning the bruised purple sky, caught the glint of dying sunlight on metal. Flight altitude, 3,000 meters. His squadron, returning from a fruitless intercept patrol, was strung out, low on fuel, weary. Below, the skeletal outlines of a shattered forest passed in a gray blur. A voice crackled in his headset, thin and strained. "Red 3 to lead, bearing 270, high. 1 contact. It's a U-88, but its profile is wrong. Very wrong." Kravchenko banked, squinting. There it was, a Junkers Ju-88 medium bomber, a common enough pest. But his pilot's instinct screamed. Its silhouette was too thick, too heavy. It flew with a strange, lumbering permanence, not the agile evasion of a reconnaissance bird. As he closed the distance, the last of the sun caught it fully. The air left his lungs. This was no ordinary bomber. Shackled to its back, like some grotesque parasitic growth, was the unmistakable frame of a Messerschmitt Bf-109 fighter, a Frankensteinian marriage of aluminum and menace. The fighter's belly was fused to the bomber's spine, its own landing gear absent. The Ju-88 below was eyeless. Its cockpit windows were painted over, a dead thing being ridden. "Lead to all units. Hold fire. Do not engage. Observe." Kravchenko's order was a whisper of disbelief. He pushed the throttle, climbing for a better angle. The thing moved with a single, unified purpose. The fighter on top, its master. The bomber beneath, its beast of burden. You could see the unnatural stress points on the Ju-88's airframe, the heavy shackles that bound them. This wasn't aeronautics. This was alchemy.
On the ground, Sergeant Pyotr V. Garanin, commander of a 37mm anti-aircraft battery, tracked the anomaly through his Zenit scope. His experienced hands froze on the traversing wheel. He'd seen Stukas, Heinkels, Focke-Wulfs. This defied logic. A report choked in his throat before he could shout it. His gun crew fell silent, following his gaze upward. The low, resonant drone of the paired engines was different, a dissonant chord, a bass note of impending doom. Kravchenko's wingman, a young pilot named Sokolov, broke the radio silence, his voice tight with a child's confusion. "Comrade Lieutenant, what in God's name is it for?" That was the question, wasn't it? The for. This was not a transport. It was not a bomber in any conventional sense. The dead, windowless eyes of the lower aircraft spoke of a single, terminal journey. Kravchenko felt a cold deeper than the altitude seep into his gut. This was a weapon built not for battle, but for obliteration. A weapon designed for a target so hard, so valuable, that the very laws of aircraft design had been broken to kill it. As the monstrosity droned steadily west, back towards German lines, untouched by Soviet fire, it left a deeper chill than any winter wind. It left a question, a silhouette of terror etched against the twilight. Intelligence had no name for this. Doctrine had no counter. They had just looked into the future of warfare, and it was a two-headed, flying abomination. And it was clear to every man who saw it that the next time it appeared, it would not be observing. It would be arriving.
The photographic plates, developed in the chemical stinking darkroom of the 16th Air Army's intelligence shack, made the nightmare concrete. Lieutenant Kravchenko, still in his flight gear, pointed a nicotine-stained finger at the grainy image. Here, the attachment struts. They are not for transport. They are structural, permanent. Across the table, Major Ilya Rostov, a cadaverous man from GRU military intelligence, didn't blink. He had pulled files, cryptic intercepts from Swedish diplomatic sources, whispers from the Polish Home Army about a German project called Beethoven. And now, this. A code name emerged from the static. Mistel. Mistletoe. The parasitic plant. The lower aircraft, Rostov said, his voice flat, is a gross bomb Träger, a large bomb carrier. It is a drone. Its fuselage is packed with a shaped charge, up to 3,800 kilograms of hexogen high explosive, more than a railroad gun's shell. He tapped the photo of the fighter above. This, the Leitjäger, the control fighter. The pilot sits here. He aims the entire combination. At the final moment, he releases the locking clamps, detaches, and the fighter's rocket boosters pull him clear as the bomber... He didn't finish. He didn't need to. The room understood. You didn't need precision with that much explosive. You needed a delivery system that could penetrate defenses, fly low, and impact a target like a piston from hell. This was the answer to a question Soviet High Command was desperately asking. How would the Nazis try to stop the inevitable Soviet advance across the great rivers of Europe? How would they shatter the bridges at the Vistula, the Oder, or worse,
The Tirpitz, Kravchenko breathed, recalling naval briefings. The Allied convoys, a fortress at sea. Rostov gave a grim nod. The Mistel wasn't just a weapon, it was a key designed to blow open the toughest locks the Allies possessed. Hardened bunkers, impregnable dams, capital warships anchored in fortified fjords. The mind recoiled at the engineering, at the cold calculus of it. They took a veteran, war-weary Ju-88 airframe, stripped its soul, filled its belly with annihilation, and gave it a psychic, a pilot in a fighter grafted to its back to guide it to its grave. In workshops across Germany, the process was clinical. The Ju-88's cockpit was filled with concrete for stable flight. Its controls were placed by simple servo motors responding to the fighter pilot's stick. The explosive charge in its nose wasn't just packed, it was sculpted, a hollow cone designed to focus the blast forward, to punch through meters of reinforced concrete or armored steel plate. The connection mechanism was a masterpiece of brutal pragmatism. Heavy-duty struts with explosive bolts, the electrical umbilical running from the Leitjäger to the beast below. Back on the front, the reporting sightings were now funneled to a secret desk in Moscow. Each encounter painted a more terrifying tactical picture. The Mistels flew at night, often under escort. They were slow, ungainly, but they were never alone. They were the centerpiece of a deadly bouquet, protected by flocks of agile fighters. To get to the monster, you had to go through its guardians. Sergeant Geranin, at his gun, received new orders. Priority engagement. Target the lower aircraft. Its destruction is paramount. He relayed this to his crew, young men who had seen the thing once and dreamed of it since. They practiced traversing their gun faster, tracking imaginary lumbering twins in the sky. The fear had morphed. It was no longer the shock of the unknown. It was the precise, chilling fear of understanding the known. They were now waiting for a bomb with wings, a bomb that before it detonated would look you right in the eye from the cockpit of its guiding fighter. And the greatest question of all remained, hanging in the air like the Mistel's dissonant drone. Where was the first one going to fall?
The answer to where the Mistels would fall arrived not with a single cataclysm, but with a scattered, desperate fury. By D-Day, June 6, 1944, the Mistel program, codenamed Operation Iron Hammer, was thrust from developmental terror to operational panic. The Allies were on the beaches of Normandy. The Reich needed miracles. And so the human torpedoes were unleashed. Picture it from the cockpit of the Leitjäger. You are Oberlieutenant Klaus Hartmann, a veteran of the Channel Front. Your aircraft is not an aircraft. It is the trigger of a 2-stage, 20-ton bomb. Before you, through your windscreen, stretches the dead nose of the Ju-88, a constant, hulking reminder of your payload. Your controls are heavy, the coupled aircraft responding with the sluggishness of a dying whale. The engine vibrations are a constant, teeth-rattling symphony. You are a brain attached to a monster. Your target tonight? The invasion fleet anchorage off Sword Beach. Intelligence promises a rich harvest of transport ships. The flag over the black water is an exercise in primal dread. Searchlight fingers probe the darkness. The sky ahead blooms with lethal, beautiful flowers of flak. Puffs of black and red sent up by vigilant destroyers. The escorts, a pair of FW-190s, weave around you, their pilots your only link to a world of aerodynamic sanity. This is not dogfighting. This is aiming. You push the monstrous combination into a shallow dive. The engine notes rise to a screaming whine. The Ju-88 beneath you is now a guided sled, hurtling toward the water. At 800 meters, your thumb finds the release trigger on the control stick. It is not a button. It is a divorce decree. You pray the explosive bolts fire cleanly. You pray the rocket boosters under your fighter's wings ignite. For a second, you are part of the bomb. You pull.
A deafening crack bang as the struts blow. A violent jolt as your Messerschmitt is thrown upward, the rocket motors screaming to life, yanking you away from the suddenly orphaned bomber. You bank hard, G-forces pressing you into your seat. In your peripheral vision, you see the Ju-88, your Ju-88, continue its relentless, unguided trajectory. It flies now with a ghost's purpose, a black arrowhead aimed at the heart of the chaos below. You don't see the impact, you feel it. A flash that turns night into a false, violent day, illuminating the undersides of the clouds. A shockwave that punches your fighter, rattling the airframe like a child's toy. Then the sound. A deep, volcanic thud that reaches you through the very fabric of the sky. A column of water and fire erupts, a temporary geyser of destruction. On the radio, the escorts call out, confirming it. A direct hit on a Liberty ship. A secondary explosion. A kill. But for every Hartmann, there were a dozen failures. The Soviet intelligence reports now spoke of Mistels found crashed in fields, their explosive cargo intact, released too early, guidance failed, shot down by a Hawker Typhoon's devastating cannon fire. The Allies, initially baffled, adapted. Naval gunners were briefed, aim for the larger, lower component. The psychological warfare was as potent as the physical. To face a plane that was, by design, already a corpse, piloted by a man who was, in essence, a suicide bomber with a chance of survival, was to face a new tier of fanaticism. On the Eastern Front, the sightings grew more frequent. The Mistel's intended role had shifted. With the Tirpitz sunk by tallboy bombs and the Atlantic Wall breached, the new targets were the bridges over the Oder and Vistula, the lifelines of the Soviet steamroller. But here the Red Air Force, now dominant in the sky, had its answer. Swarm tactics. They would ignore the escorts, sacrifice entire flights if needed to get to the sluggish, vulnerable composite beast. The calculus was simple. Lose 3 fighters to save a strategic bridge that would cost 10,000 lives to assault across a river. The Mistel was a weapon of strategic desperation, a sledgehammer in an era where the war was being decided by scalpels. And, as the Reich contracted, its targets grew closer to home. The final, unthinkable use of the Mistel was now on the drawing boards. Not for bridges or ships, but for the very heart of the Soviet war machine itself.
March 12, 1945. The Oder River. A wide, gray-brown gash through the frozen earth. The prize? The railway bridge at Küstrin. For the advancing First Belarusian Front under Marshal Zhukov, It was the last major river crossing before Berlin. For the crumbling Third Reich, it was a choke point where the Soviet juggernaut could and must be decapitated. The order came from the Führer bunker itself: destroy the Küstrin bridges. And the Mistel squadron at Rechlin was the designated hammer. Dawn. A dirty, pale light seeped across the airfield. Ground crews moved with a frantic, hollow-eyed urgency. They were not arming aircraft, they were performing the last rites on machines. Lieutenant Kravchenko's squadron, flying Lend-Lease P-39 Airacobras, orbited at high altitude east of the river, waiting. They'd been briefed on the Parasite aircraft. They knew the bridge was the target. Their orders were absolute: intercept and destroy before the release point. They were not just defending a bridge, they were defending the roadmap to Berlin. Below, the first Mistel combination, a U-88/G and its FW-190 Master, began its takeoff run. It was an act of violence against physics. The combined weight strained the FW-190's engine to its limit. The runway seemed to shrink. For agonizing seconds, it refused to believe it could fly. Then, grudgingly, the wheels left the earth, the composite beast clawing its way into the sky, flying low and slow, a vulture heavy with its own death. Kravchenko saw them, not one but five, a staggered line of grotesque twins skimming the treetops, following the river's course. Their fighter escorts, a mix of Me-262 jets and veteran Bf-109s, swarmed around them like hyperactive guard dogs. The Soviet pilots dove. What followed was not a dogfight. It was a savage, sacrificial brawl.
Sergeant Garanin's anti-aircraft battery, dug in on the eastern bank, opened up. The air became a thicket of steel and smoke. Tracers arced toward the lumbering monsters. One Mistel took a direct hit in its Ju-88 component. It did not explode. Instead, it simply came apart. The fighter ripped from its back in a tangle of shredded metal, the bomber cartwheeling into the odor in a colossal non-nuclear splash. No monumental blast, just a silent, sinking coffin. But others got through. Kravchenko, bleeding from a shrapnel wound in his shoulder, locked onto a Mistel at point-blank range. He could see the pilot in the FW-190, a stark silhouette against the morning sky. For a fleeting moment, their eyes met across the void, not as pilot to pilot, but as deliverer to executioner. Kravchenko fired. His shells tore into the Ju-88's wing root. The composite aircraft shuddered, began to yaw violently. The German pilot, his aim ruined, had one choice: release early or die fused to his own bomb. He released. The explosive-laden Ju-88, its control surfaces mangled, spun away like a drunkard. It missed the central span of the bridge by 200 meters, impacting the riverbank in an apocalyptic detonation. The earth itself leaped. A shockwave of mud, ice, and debris washed over the bridge and Garanin's position, stunning men and shaking fortifications to their foundations. The bridge, however, stood. A second Mistel was not so inaccurate. Released cleanly, its pilot pulling his FW-190 into a screaming, rocket-assisted climb, the drone bomber flew its final straight line. It struck the bridge's eastern approach. The shape-charge warhead did its hideous work. When the fireball and smoke cleared, a section of the railroad tracks and supporting girders was a twisted skeletal ruin, a direct hit. But it was not a kill. The main central span, the vital artery, remained intact, repairable. The Mistel had maimed, not murdered, its target. The cost to the Mistel squadron had been near total annihilation. The Soviets, for all their losses, had won the calculus. They had traded planes and lives for a bridge, and the bridge, though wounded, was still theirs. The failure at Küstrin was the Mistel's epitaph.
It was a weapon that demanded air superiority it would never again possess, targeting precision its crude guidance could never guarantee. It was the stark, screaming symbol of a Reich out of time, out of ideas, out of sky. It was a monster that died, not with a bang that changed the war, but with a scattered whimper across the burning fields of Germany. The terror was over. The cleanup, the reckoning, and the final chilling discovery had just begun.
May 8th, 1945. The ceasefire is in effect. The monstrous roar of the Eastern Front has faded into an unsettling, ringing silence, broken only by the rumble of Soviet tanks advancing in parade formation and the distant, sporadic cheers of the liberated. In a pine forest near the Luftwaffe airbase at Parchim, a discovery is made. Not by intelligence officers, but by a squad of weary riflemen from the 3rd Shock Army, hunting for stray SS holdouts. They push through the dense undergrowth and stop, their weapons lowering in disbelief. Before them, lined up in neat, ghostly rows under camouflage netting, are aircraft, dozens of them. But these are not flight-ready machines, they are components. Ju-88 airframes, their noses gaping open, empty, waiting for the explosive charge that would have made them whole. Next to them, like beetles awaiting their hosts, are the control fighters, FW-190s, Me-109s, their attachment points clean and functional. This is the Mistel graveyard, the silent horde. Major Rostov, the GRU intelligence officer, arrives. He walks slowly down the lines, his boots crunching on the pine needles. He runs a hand over the cold, damp wing of a Ju-88. There is no menace here now, only a profound industrial melancholy. These were not weapons of a fighting air force. They were the stockpiled munitions of a last apocalyptic stand. Interrogated German technicians, their spirits broken, revealed the truth. Operation Iron Hammer had evolved into Operation Dämmerung, Operation Twilight. The final target portfolio was not bridges or ships. It was the power plants of Moscow, the Kremlin itself, the Volga dams. Grandiose terror strikes on the Soviet homeland, to be launched in the war's final convulsive hours, a final Gotterdammerung from a regime that chose universal ruin over surrender. The silence in this forest is not the silence of defeat. It is the silence of averted cataclysm.
Rostov understands now. The true horror of the Mistel was never its first shocking appearance over the marshlands. That was just the birth of the fear. The true horror was its potential. It was a weapon that bypassed armies and fleets to target the very idea of victory. It was a machine designed to turn the pilot, that most romanticized of warriors, into a glorified bomb aimer for his own coffin. It reduced the complex art of aerial combat to a single suicidal button. A week later, at an abandoned hangar, Lieutenant Kravchenko stands before a fully assembled Mistel. The combination is lifted on jacks, a museum exhibit of madness. He walks underneath it, looking up at the brutal shackles, the crude welds. The cold, dead eyes of the U-88's painted-over cockpit stare back. You can almost smell the fuel, the nervous sweat of the pilot who would have climbed into the upper fighter, the acidic tang of fear that would have filled his mouth on the run-in to the target. He thinks of the German pilot at Küstrin, the one whose eyes he'd met. Had he felt like a knight, or like a component in a machine? The Mistel was the ultimate expression of the Nazi war machine's logic. Everything, even human courage and skill, was fungible. Everything was raw material to be consumed in the fire. The Mistel program faded from history, a bizarre footnote, a technological dead end born of desperation. But its legacy is a chilling question that hangs in the air, as tangible as the shape of the aircraft in that hangar. What happens when ingenuity divorces itself from humanity? when the only solution left is to build a bigger, more grotesque bomb, and then build a man to fly it into the heart of the abyss. The silent horde in the forest was the answer. A fleet of gravestones for a future that never arrived, and a permanent monument to the darkness that descends when strategy runs out of everything but rage.